I was warned to stay away, but when my friend's mom whispered, "You're dangerous, but I want you anyway," everything I thought I knew about desire and boundaries changed. The first time I really noticed her, I didn't even realize it. I was at my friend's house, supposed to be dropping off a book I had borrowed, and the air inside smelled faintly of vanilla and polished wood. The kind of warm, familiar scent that makes a place feel lived in yet comforting, like it has a memory of its own. I barely raised my head from the book as the door closed behind me, but then she appeared in the hallway, a quiet, graceful presence that somehow made the space feel smaller, more intimate. She was moving slowly, deliberately, folding laundry or perhaps putting dishes away. I couldn't tell at first. All I knew was that her presence stopped me mid-step. Her hair was pulled loosely over one shoulder, a few strands escaping to frame her face, catching the soft light in a way that made her look almost ethereal. There was a calm confidence in the way she moved, but beneath it, I sensed a subtle vulnerability, like someone carrying a quiet weight they weren't ready to share. I tried to focus on my friend, on the excuse for being there, but my eyes kept drifting back. She noticed, of course, but didn't call me out. Instead, she gave a small, almost imperceptible smile, like she understood my wandering thoughts but wasn't ready to comment. When she walked past me, our arms brushed, just a light, accidental touch, but it left a strange warmth spreading through my chest. Not shock, not desire exactly, but a gentle spark that made me conscious of every movement, every breath. Her proximity made the air feel different, heavier in a way that I couldn't ignore. We exchanged casual words, nothing that mattered in the ordinary sense, a question about the book, a comment on the weather. Yet, her voice carried a subtle richness that lingered in my ears long after the words were gone. There was humor behind her words, a teasing softness that made me want to listen closer, to lean into the conversation even when it was just small talk. And there was a quiet strength in her presence, something that felt steady and grounding, though I couldn't have explained why. By the time I left, I was already replaying the moment in my head. Her hand brushing mine, the tilt of her head as she smiled, the calm confidence in her movements, it all lingered, a quiet pull I couldn't name yet. And beneath that pull, a strange thrill, the unspoken acknowledgement that she saw me, really saw me, in a way that left me both unsettled and undeniably curious. I knew, somewhere deep down, that this curiosity wasn't just about admiration. It was something else, something I wasn't supposed to feel, yet couldn't ignore. And I knew, without fully understanding why, that the next time I came here, things would feel different. Somehow, her presence had changed the air around me, and maybe, just maybe, I was about to step into a story I didn't yet have the words to describe. The next few visits to my friend's house were no longer just about errands or borrowed books. Somehow, being there meant being near her. Even when she was occupied with mundane tasks, the air felt different, charged with a quiet tension I couldn't quite name. That afternoon, I found myself in the kitchen, helping to put away groceries. She was at the counter, arranging jars of spices and cans with careful precision, her hands moving with a kind of grace that made even the simplest task feel deliberate, intimate. As I reached for a can, our fingers brushed, again, light and fleeting, but this time I didn't pull back immediately. The warmth of her touch lingered in my skin, sending a flutter through my chest that was almost dizzying. I tried to focus on the shelf, on the task at hand, but I could feel her presence as tangibly as the sunlight spilling through the window. She glanced at me, her eyes catching mine for a heartbeat longer than necessary, and in that fleeting connection, I felt something unspoken pass between us, awareness, curiosity, a subtle acknowledgement that neither of us could fully articulate. We moved around each other in easy, casual proximity. She leaned over slightly to reach a jar on a higher shelf, and the curve of her back, the way her hair fell forward, made my pulse thrum in a way I was trying hard to ignore. Yet it wasn't just physical. It was the way she seemed entirely comfortable in her space, completely herself, that drew me in. I realized I was watching more than I should, noticing the small, human details, the slight arch of her eyebrow when she concentrated, the soft laugh that escaped when she realized I'd dropped a bag of beans. At one point, she handed me a towel to dry my hands, and our fingers lingered as we passed it back and forth. It was a tiny, ordinary gesture, but it carried a weight I couldn't shake. The warmth of her hand, the subtle brush of her palm against mine, made my heart rate spike. I caught myself imagining what it would feel like if she stayed close like that longer, not just passing the towel, but just staying there, sharing a quiet moment. Even our conversation felt charged. It was nothing remarkable on paper, small jokes, comments about the groceries, questions about school or work. But the undertones were electric in their subtlety. Every glance, every fleeting smile, every careful pause between words felt like an invitation to linger a second longer, to notice more than was socially acceptable. I sensed her awareness of my attention, yet she never called it out, never pushed, never encouraged, simply let it exist in the quiet tension of shared space. By the time I left that afternoon, I was acutely aware of how heavy the air had felt, how each moment near her had been layered with unspoken meaning. I wasn't sure what I was feeling: curiosity, attraction, something that scared me and thrilled me in equal measure, but I knew I wanted more. More of the brief touches, the fleeting proximity, the silent acknowledgement that something electric was passing between us. I didn't know where it might lead, but for the first time, I understood the weight of a glance, the intimacy in ordinary presence, and how dangerous it could be to notice someone the way I noticed her. Rain tapped gently against the windows that evening, a soft rhythm that seemed to slow time itself. The world outside was gray and quiet, and inside, the house smelled faintly of coffee and old books, comforting, warm, like a space that had absorbed decades of memories. I had come over under the pretense of helping with something small, but somehow, these visits were no longer about errands. Being near her had become magnetic, a quiet pull I couldn't resist. We found ourselves in the living room, sitting across from each other on the couch. She was curled into a soft throw, one knee tucked under her, a mug of steaming tea cradled in her hands. Her eyes, reflecting the soft lamplight, held a gentleness that contrasted with the subtle fire I had glimpsed before, a mix of vulnerability and quiet strength. She spoke about her day, about things that seemed mundane on the surface, work, errands, small frustrations, but the way she talked made me notice more than words. There was a softness in her tone, a rhythmic cadence that drew me in. At one point, I reached for the sugar to stir my own tea, and our hands brushed accidentally, or maybe not so accidentally. It was light, just a passing touch, but I felt a warmth spread from my fingers to my chest. She didn't pull back, and I noticed the faintest smile on her lips, as if she, too, felt the weight of the contact. My pulse picked up, but I tried to focus on the tea, on the comforting steam curling from the mug, on the way her shoulder moved when she shifted slightly. There was a pause in the conversation, a quiet space that stretched longer than usual. She leaned back and looked at me, her eyes catching mine with a depth I hadn't seen before. And then, as casually as she might mention the weather, she said something that lingered far longer than the words themselves, a teasing observation about me, about my seriousness, about the way I seemed to notice everything in the room. There was a hidden layer beneath it, a subtle acknowledgement of the tension that had been building between us, a hint that she had noticed too. I swallowed hard, my mind racing, heart beating faster than I dared let it. The room felt smaller, warmer, heavier. Every little detail, the tilt of her head, the way her fingers wrapped around her mug, the quiet exhales she let slip, became amplified in my awareness. Her presence was intoxicating, not in a loud or obvious way, but in a quiet, magnetic pull that made the air feel thick and intimate. I realized then that this wasn't just curiosity anymore. She was giving me glimpses, small, careful hints of something more, something unspoken. And I, equally careful, was hanging on every gesture, every word, every lingering glance. The story we were building between us wasn't about confessions yet, wasn't about words spoken aloud. It was about proximity, about the quiet weight of shared moments, about the delicate tension of knowing something was possible, even if either of us dared name it outright. By the time I left that evening, the rain had eased to a drizzle, and I walked home with my thoughts tangled in the memory of her hands, her gaze, the soft warmth of her presence. The pull between us had strengthened, subtle but undeniable, a quiet confession in disguise, waiting for the moment when we could speak it aloud, or at least, lean a little closer in silence. That night, the house was quiet in a way that made every sound feel magnified: the soft hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the wooden floorboards underfoot, the occasional distant bark of a dog outside. The living room light was dim, casting long shadows across the furniture, painting the walls with a warmth that made the space feel both intimate and secretive. I had lingered longer than usual, an excuse about helping her tidy up barely holding up in my mind. Every instinct told me this visit would be different. She appeared in the hallway, moving toward the kitchen, and I followed instinctively, our steps soft against the floor. The air seemed thicker, charged, as if the space itself was waiting for something to happen. She paused by the counter, and I noticed the faint scent of her perfume, a gentle blend of something floral, earthy, undeniably her, curling around me. I tried to keep my composure, reminding myself that this was impossible, yet I couldn't ignore the way my chest tightened when she looked at me. Then she stepped closer, closer than she needed to be for any practical reason, just close enough that I could feel her warmth brushing against my arm. Her eyes met mine, holding a steady, almost staring calm that made it hard to look away. Every second stretched, the quiet ticking of the clock echoing in my ears. I wanted to speak, to break the tension, but the words stuck, leaving me suspended in the space between desire and hesitation. And then she leaned just slightly forward, her voice dropping into a whisper meant only for me. "You're dangerous, but I want you anyway." The words were soft, almost fragile, but they hit me with an intensity that made my heart hammer against my ribs. Time seemed to slow. I could feel the warmth of her breath near my ear, the light brush of her hand against my wrist as she steadied herself. It wasn't reckless or loud, it was intimate, quiet, deliberate, and it carried a gravity that left me breathless. I felt a rush of conflicting emotions: shock, disbelief, curiosity, and a thrill I couldn't name. Her proximity, the faint tremor in her fingers, the way her gaze held mine without wavering, made the room feel impossibly small, like the world outside had ceased to exist. Every detail became amplified: the soft rise and fall of her chest, the way her hair fell forward and caught the lamplight, the subtle scent that lingered in the air. I wanted to step back, to remind myself of the boundaries, but I couldn't. The pull between us was undeniable, a quiet magnetism that had been building over days and weeks. She let the moment linger, her words sinking in, giving me space to feel it without pressure, letting the tension sit heavy between us like an unspoken promise. When she finally stepped back, the spell wasn't broken. I could still feel the warmth of her presence, the echo of her whisper, the way her eyes had held mine as if daring me to respond. I left that night with my mind spinning, aware that the game had changed, that what had been curiosity and subtle attraction was now a tangible, undeniable force. Something had shifted between us, delicate yet electric, a moment I would replay endlessly in my head, waiting for the next step, the next chance to be near her again. I couldn't sleep that night. The words she had whispered, "You're dangerous, but I want you anyway," echoed through my mind, over and over, each repetition bringing a new wave of disbelief and tension. I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling, aware of every creak in the house, every hum of the city outside, but nothing could drown out the memory of her voice, soft and deliberate, brushing against my ear. It wasn't just the words themselves. It was the way she had leaned close, the warmth of her body, the faint brush of her hand against mine. I could still feel it, a lingering heat that made my chest tighten and my thoughts scatter. I ran my hand along the sheet, trying to distract myself, but the memory clung stubbornly, weaving through my mind with a quiet insistence. I realized, in that moment, that the attraction wasn't just physical, it was deeper, threaded with an unspoken understanding, a shared recognition of something electric between us. And yet, every instinct I had screamed caution. This was my friend's mother. Someone I had known casually for years, someone I wasn't supposed to think of in this way. Social boundaries, ethics, the unspoken rules of proximity, they all tugged at me, demanding I step back, that I pushed the feeling away. I tried to imagine the scenario from an outsider's perspective, and the conflict made my chest ache. But the more I tried to resist, the more vivid the memory became: the tilt of her head, the warmth of her breath, the gentle weight of her presence in the hallway. I found myself analyzing every small gesture we'd shared: the brush of hands in the kitchen, the lingering glances across the room, the quiet laughter we exchanged over meaningless things. They had felt innocent at the time, casual, but now, I recognized the tension beneath them, the subtle pull that had been building slowly, almost imperceptibly. And she had noticed it too, of that I was certain. Her whisper wasn't reckless. It was measured, deliberate, an acknowledgement of what had been quietly growing between us. There was also a strange thrill in the tension, a dangerous excitement that made my mind spin. I caught myself replaying her words, imagining how it might feel to lean closer, to let the moment linger longer than it had. My pulse quickened, a mix of anticipation and fear. The contradiction was exhausting. I wanted to step closer, but I also wanted to run, to preserve the boundaries that still felt real. Hours passed, and sleep remained elusive. I lay there, wrestling with my own impulses, aware of the magnitude of what had begun. This wasn't just a fleeting crush or idle curiosity. It was something that demanded awareness, that carried weight, that was both thrilling and forbidden. And yet, in spite of every warning, I knew one thing with certainty: I wanted to see her again. I wanted to be near her, to feel the quiet magnetism that pulled us together, even if it was dangerous, even if it was wrong. By morning, the tension hadn't faded, it had only deepened. And I realized that the hesitation, the self-conflict, the constant push and pull, it was all part of the story we were beginning to write together. A story that neither of us had fully acknowledged yet, but one I was powerless to ignore. The next time I came over, the air between us had shifted. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable once I noticed it. She greeted me with that same warm smile, the one that had always felt effortless, but now it carried a new depth, a quiet acknowledgement of what had been spoken and what had yet to be said. There was no rush, no urgency, only a shared understanding that our connection had changed. We sat in the living room that afternoon, the sun spilling through the curtains in soft, golden beams. Outside, the neighborhood was calm, leaves rustling in a gentle breeze, the distant sound of children playing in a yard far away. Inside, the room felt intimate, safe, a cocoon that allowed us to exist in a small, shared world where the tension of previous encounters could transform into something warmer. She poured tea for both of us, her hand steady, her eyes meeting mine as she placed the cup in front of me. The motion was ordinary yet charged. The simple gesture of offering a cup became an act of quiet intimacy. As we sipped, the conversation unfolded naturally, flowing from books we both read to memories of our past, to small confessions about worries and hopes. Her voice was soft, melodic, yet carried a grounded strength, and I felt the tension I had carried in my chest begin to ease. It wasn't that the attraction had disappeared, it hadn't, but the sharp edge of it softened into something comforting, a warmth that spread through me with every word, every glance, every shared silence. At one point, she reached over to adjust a blanket that had slipped from her shoulder, and her fingers brushed my knee lightly. It was unintentional, she claimed, but the warmth of her touch lingered far longer than necessary. My heart raced, yet there was no panic this time, only awareness, a quiet delight in the closeness we were allowing ourselves. I found myself leaning slightly toward her without thinking, drawn to the calm magnetism of her presence. She laughed softly at something I said, a laugh that felt like sunlight warming the space between us. Her hand lingered briefly on the arm of the couch, near mine, and I felt the urge to reach for it, to close the distance, but restrained myself, letting the moment exist as it was, charged, yet tender, intimate without words. Every gesture, every glance, every pause became a language of its own, one that conveyed trust, attraction, and something deeper than simple desire. By the end of the afternoon, as she walked me to the door, our hands brushed again, lightly, almost accidentally, but this time, either of us pulled away. There was a silent acknowledgement in that small contact, a recognition that we were both aware of the line we were approaching, yet comfortable to linger just on the edge. The warmth, the trust, the quiet affection, it all felt like a slow, steady dance, one we were learning together. I left that day with a sense of anticipation that was different from before. The forbidden thrill remained, but now it was tempered by something more profound, the awareness that our connection wasn't fleeting or superficial. It was growing, tender and deliberate, a slow-burn intimacy that neither of us wanted to rush. And for the first time, I realized that the story between us wasn't only about tension, it was about closeness, understanding, and the quiet joy of simply being near someone who truly saw you. That evening, the sky was painted in soft shades of pink and orange, the kind of light that makes everything feel a little more intimate, a little more suspended in time. I had stopped by under the pretense of returning a borrowed book, though neither of us was thinking about books anymore. The air carried the faint scent of her perfume mixed with the earthy smell of the garden outside, a combination that had become quietly familiar, almost comforting in its way. She met me at the door, her smile warm, and something in her gaze made my chest tighten, not from nervousness this time, but from a sense of belonging I hadn't expected to feel. The house was calm, almost reverent in its quiet, and we gravitated toward the back porch where the late light painted everything in golden hues. We sat side by side, close enough that our shoulders brushed lightly, and for a long moment either of us spoke. There was no need. The silence itself was charged with understanding, an acknowledgement that the distance between us had shortened, not just physically, but emotionally. Her hand moved subtly, almost unconsciously, until it rested lightly near mine. I didn't reach for it at first. I let the moment linger, savoring the sensation of proximity, the warmth radiating from her. Then, tentatively, my fingers brushed hers. A small, careful touch. She didn't pull away. Instead, she shifted slightly, allowing our hands to meet fully. The gesture was simple, innocent, yet it carried the weight of everything that had passed between us, the tension, the curiosity, the longing, and the gradual trust that had been building over weeks. We talked quietly then, voices low, sharing stories, jokes, and small confessions. The conversation flowed naturally, effortlessly, a rhythm we had come to know. Every now and then, our knees or elbows would brush, and each touch felt meaningful, a quiet reaffirmation that we were both aware of the connection we had nurtured, and that we wanted to honor it without rushing it. I noticed the subtle changes in her expressions, the way her eyes softened when she laughed, the gentle tilt of her head when she listened, the way her hand would linger near mine as if testing the waters. Eventually she leaned her head against my shoulder, light and unassuming. My arm moved instinctively around her, a protective, comforting gesture that was more about presence than passion. Her breath was warm against my chest, steady, calm, and I felt a quiet contentment that made the world outside the porch fade away. There was no urgency, no reckless impulse, just the shared warmth of being together, fully seen and accepted. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with deeper shades of purple and gold, we stayed like that, side by side, hands entwined, hearts quietly aligned. The earlier tension had softened into something steady and lasting, an unspoken promise that we would navigate this connection carefully, tenderly, and with respect for each other and the world around us. When I finally stood to leave, our hands lingered in a gentle squeeze, a silent affirmation that this was far from over. She smiled, and in that smile I saw warmth, trust, and a subtle, undeniable affection. The story had reached a satisfying close for now, not with explosive declarations or rushed passion, but with quiet intimacy, mutual understanding, and the comforting knowledge that our bond had grown into something real, tender, and beautifully human.